Hello everyone. In this video I'm going to talk a little bit more about the financial side of buying a house specifically. I've mentioned some of these topics in a way in previous videos, but I'm going to talk about them in a little bit more detail this time. So, first of the big financial things is a down payment. And this is based upon my experience. I am not a mortgage expert, nor am I a realty expert. But my experience is that the size of your down payment does not affect interest rate much, if at all. It may vary if you try to go way low on your down payment percentage, like 1% of the house down. So if you bought a $200,000 house and you were going to do a 1% down payment, that would be $2,000. If you went way low like that, it might affect the interest rate. It might get your loan application denied. I really don't know. I don't know how low is too low, or if too low, or if too low even exists right now. Um, but what I was informally told by one person was anywhere between like 5% and the sky is the limit. It won't affect your interest rate really at all. What will affect the interest rate is the length of the loan. And I'll talk about that more in just a little bit. Something the down payment can do is make you look better. And that really only becomes important when you're in a competitive offer situation. Like if you're competing against other offers, if everything on those offers is the same, they'll probably go with the person who has a larger down payment just because it makes it look less likely that your loan will fall through at the last second and they'll have to relist the house and go through all the effort again. The earnest money, which I mentioned before, as being kind of like a security deposit, that is part of your down payment. Once you're actually like closing on the house, the earnest money will contribute to the down payment or closing costs or whichever. And the down payment percentage affects whether or not you pay PMI. I think the typical PMI, that's what, private mortgage insurance. I think the typical PMI line is 20%. And basically what that is if you don't put enough of a percentage down, you have to buy an insurance and pay an extra monthly fee to help the lender recoup losses if the loan goes belly up and the house doesn't cover it. So next is interest rate. Interest rate is really something right now. And there's a couple different loan structures. I definitely wouldn't recommend variable rate. Frankly, I think they're predatory. But like I said, I'm not an expert in the field, so that's just my opinion. They often end up looking real good up front and end up being real bad. But you can modify your interest rate some with points and credits. I went into a fairly lengthy thing about that recently. But with interest rate, a lot of this has long-term consequences because small changes in your interest rate percentage can make for huge changes later. Just over the length of like a 30-year mortgage, if that's what you're doing. And that is one situation where, well, small percentages fool us. I'd literally have a video entitled that as one of my earlier videos. So it can make a really big difference, so you should pay attention to the math involved in your situation and make sure that you're being responsible and that it's something that you think you can be happy with later, whatever you're getting. So the one way to change your interest rate is if you can afford it without issues, going with a shorter term loan will lower your interest rate. It just will. Now, in my case, the math on that didn't work out because I think I can take that money and invest it and get a faster rate of return than my interest will accumulate. So for me, it didn't make sense to do that. If you're super uncomfortable with investing or you think the investment market is going to be terrible or whatever, that's perfectly fair. You can try a shorter loan. I'm just highlighting why I did not. But one of the keys is shop around a lot. And your realtor may even discourage you from shopping around for loans. Just do it. Right? You may get told something like, well, if you get too many hits, it'll hurt your credit score. Or, well, we really work with these guys usually. Or, all of that stuff is irrelevant. Shop around. Just do it. Before you even talk to a realtor. Like, before I talked to a realtor, I had 3 separate pre-approvals before I even spoke with a realtor. And some people just don't do that. They'll only talk to like one agency the whole time or go with whoever their realtor recommends. And there is something for verbal recommendations. I'm not saying those are meaningless. I'm just saying that this is an enormous decision, particularly once we get into interest rate. And if for 10 minutes of effort you can save thousands or tens of thousands of dollars over the next 30 years of your life, why wouldn't you? That's an easy call, easy investment in yourself. So I definitely recommend shopping around. I don't know what a reasonable number is. I think I went through the process with 6 different places, and I asked for people's experiences with a few others. And it just, saving 10 points on your credit score just isn't worth thousands of dollars. It's not. I don't care what the 3 big credit agencies will tell you. It just isn't worth it. Get the best deal. Screw your credit score. Assuming that, you're not going to decide to do one hard credit check a month for 10 years. That's a little different. But when you're combining all of these things in like a ton of hits and applications in like 1 or 2 months, they'll all get lumped into 1 or 2 different hits on your long-term credit report. So you won't even see 50 different hits that'll each lower your score by just, for example, 10 points. You'll only see 2. Not that big a deal. So anyway, the advice is shop around a bunch. There's really no drawback, and don't listen to what anyone else says, in my opinion. Now, the irony of that, of course, is that I basically just told you to only listen to me, and the reality is you should double check everything I say and make sure it's aligning with your experience all the way through. Don't just trust me blindly either. This is your thing, and it's a very important decision. So you should take your time, explore all the avenues, do whatever research you like, and if I'm part of it, great. But that is, I guess, why this is so important. So, next thing is closing costs, and this is something that can vary a lot. I wrote down here what my items were, and I personally chose to get credits to my loan and slightly increase the interest rate to cover the vast majority of these closing costs. So different places will call the origination fee something different, but basically it's just you're paying money because you don't have enough money, classic loan stuff. Then you're paying for an appraisal, which is completely meaningless because in at least my housing market, they're basically just going to appraise the home for whatever you paid for it, unless you did something really stupid, like paid a $500,000 house or $500,000 for a tiny house, which in some places you can do that and it makes sense. Not here. But anyway, if it's vaguely reasonable, they'll just appraise it for whatever you bought, so that's kind of a waste. The inspection can be extremely important or unimportant, and it depends on the situation. I've talked about this some already, but basically you're just getting a licensed person to come look at the house, and they'll spend like a half day there if you get the whole place inspected. But that costs money, right? I personally would recommend an inspection. Again, just a personal opinion. But anyway, that will contribute to your closing costs. Then, and I put these under closing costs, but it's not necessarily always going to appear there. Like if you're looking at a mortgage statement, I don't remember exactly where mine were, if they were listed strictly as a closing cost or not. But oftentimes they'll ask for 1 year of property taxes and 1 year of insurance premiums. And the 1 year property taxes will be prorated. Meaning that, like, if you're buying a house in the middle of the year, your property taxes will be cut in half, right? Because you'll get a credit for the property taxes that you're not technically, or that you don't technically owe to the state or county or city or whatever. So the property taxes will be prorated. Insurance, that depends. I don't think in my case it was. Sometimes it is, just so that they can keep you on a particular calendar. And maybe you can ask for it to be, like, if you really just want to have your insurance premium run out at the same time you have to replace the license plate tabs on your car. I don't know. I'm not sure why, but you might be able to ask if you really wanted to. So here's the real question, right? The real question, for some of you potentially, the actual literal $1 million question, though I am nowhere near in that sort of financial situation, is it worth it? And that depends. It really does. And this is, again, my opinion. But if you look online and you say, should I get a house? Or you ask, like, your parents, for example, should I get a house? Most of the time what you'll get is just a bunch of the good stuff about owning a house, or like how property values have gone to the moon, right? But the reality is, it's a very complicated question, and there's lots of subjective things about it. And there's lots of luck involved, even. Like, just financially, right? What kind of house are you getting into? Is your budget low enough that you're maybe getting into a house that isn't actually very good, and if a storm comes through, you're likely to get wiped out? Are you living in a place that isn't a floodplain, but likely to get water in unexpected places? Which, for the purposes of insurance, if you're wondering, that's how they define a flood. So if there's a really bad storm that comes through and your house doesn't get any storm damage, but you end up with water in your basement, they'll call it flood damage and not cover it. So there's so many factors that go into this. What market are you in? What's your financial position? Like, are you in a market that historically has been relatively stable, or are you looking at buying a condo in a high-rise in Miami in like 2006, right? And for anyone who isn't aware, the housing market for high-rise condos in Miami did not do very well in the Great Recession, I guess we've decided to call it. Or financial crisis would be another Googleable phrase. So anyway, there's something to be said for what market you'll be in, but also the kind of house you're getting into based on your financial situation or your house desires, right? Are you in a position where you have to move into a house that's probably going to need $100,000 worth of work? Are you in a position where you financially can't afford to maintain a home if something goes wrong, right? Like, you get through your down payment and you clean your bank account out completely and move in and discover you need a new water heater, or the furnace goes out, or I don't even know. There's lots of examples of things that can go wrong. But that all of a sudden becomes a problem because now you have to take out a loan to get something fixed that's like necessary for your life, right? Whereas maybe if you lived in an apartment, that wouldn't have been a problem. So now you're digging an even deeper hole of debt. So you're basically spending, for the privilege of having overspent, so you had to take out a loan on something as expensive as a house, you earned the right to spend even more money unnecessarily because you overspent to start with. It's great. It's a genius plan. And there are people who do that, and sometimes you get lucky and nothing goes wrong, and sometimes you get hurt really bad financially, hopefully not physically. So it really depends. Like, even with subjective stuff, we can focus on finances, but there's subjective things too, right? Like, do you need more space in your life? Do you have, I'm going to make y'all motion sick here for a second. Do you have a wonderful little cat who would like more space? Do you have kids? Are you going to have kids? Are you in a stable relationship? Is your career stable? All of that factors into your desire or risk subjectively involved with buying a house. And there's so many more factors even than that. I'm not going to get into all of them because it's too much work. I've got other things to do with my time, and I'm sure you do as well. But the idea is financially, right? If we focus a little bit more on that, right? I talked about some of the ways that you can get yourself into bigger trouble owning a house. But there are some ways in which it's nice too, because if your house roughly holds its value over time, then it can make some sense. But the problem is you have to pay property taxes. In my case, property tax is going to be almost exactly half of my rent, and there were places that would have been more or less, and I know it varies widely by where you live. So you can't just say, oh, I'm sure it'll be half my rent. No. Check, please. So you'll have to pay property taxes, but you also, like I kind of hinted at, you have to maintain the thing. And maintenance can be a tricky one because, for example, every house, it feels like, at least in my area, that was built in the like mid 1990s to early 2000s has the exact same color wood finish. Like, I think it's called honey oak, and it just frankly did not age well. People do not like it now, at least people my age that I'm friends with. I don't really have an opinion. But so many people are not happy now with that color. And even like appliances, right? Late 90s all the way through for a fair amount of time in the early 2000s, white appliances or black appliances, or even a mix I've seen. Well, now it's all stainless steel, right? It's the stainless steel modern appliances is the right choice now. And what it used to be that white walls and ceiling, not like a pure white, but an off-white of same or similar color was very common. Well, now that's not quite as common. Now one of the big things is gray, at least where I live. And you've got light and dark floors, and there's just, to get a house to its maximum value can, in terms of keep like maintenance, right? But not just like fixing only the things that are broke, but keeping up with styles, right? Modern styles. You can spend $50,000 every couple of decades trying to do that on a house. So that's another huge factor is, can you afford to do that, or don't you care? Because if you don't do that, your house likely won't appreciate with the rest of the market, and it may depreciate. And that varies a lot by market. Appreciation and depreciation varies so much. Even like where I live in a relatively small metro area, going from one city to the next, going from one block even to the next in some places, determines appreciation or depreciation relative to cost of owning the house. So that is another thing to not forget about, at least, is can you afford to keep the thing modern? And if not, are you prepared for the consequences, the potential consequences? Maybe nothing, but it could be rough too. Again, depends on the market. So I guess the bottom line is, what I would say is is it worth it to own a house? I would focus on two things, more or less. Do you want to? And can you? And if those two things agree, then you may as well go for it. If those two things disagree, you kind of have to figure out what you want. If you want to and you can't, then personally I would recommend not trying, because you could end up in more trouble than it's worth and dealing with more stress than it's worth. If you can, but you don't want to, well, then that kind of feels like an obvious choice. Don't do it. Unless you're going to try to make money, in which case, I don't know, maybe you could try it as a rental property. That would be interesting, to live out of an apartment and own a house but rent it out to somebody else. I don't know. I'm sure that would work in a market for somebody, but I don't really know that I would want to do it here. So anyway, that's at least how I would view is it worth it, and some of the finances involved in making that decision. And I feel like this was maybe a little bit of a long one, so if you stuck around to this point, I appreciate it. And I will see you in the next one.